Let me know, Clerk, when we're good.
We're good to go.
Okay, thank you, members, and to Fáilte of Lig, we have quorum, and I now call the meeting to order and welcome all members to the 41st meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no photographs or recordings may be taken, please. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras and sensitivity of the microphones throughout the meeting. And finally, I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? No, thank you, members. So moving on to apologies then. Clerk, do we have any apologies today?
We have no apologies, Chair, but we have a few members who are going to be appearing on Zoom. Mr McHugh, potentially Mr Bradley and Mr Allen.
Okay, thank you. And members aware of any apologies? No, thank you. Okay, members, moving on then to Chairperson's business. So, members, we will have a closed session at the end of today's meeting to discuss our draft recommendations for the Minister and Department following on from the arts sector consultation survey and the engagement event that we did in the Long Gallery, the World Cafe event. So I'd encourage everyone to please stay on for this session if possible, and it should last no longer than 20 minutes. Moving on then to there has been an NIO audit report regarding homelessness, which members I'm sure will have picked up on, and there's a ministerial statement regarding the purchase of 600 homes to address that, or to start to address that. The NIO report highlights significant financial and operational challenges faced by the housing executive, particularly the escalating cost of temporary accommodation and the persistent shortfall in social housing supply. The report raises serious questions about the sustainability of current approaches and the effectiveness of existing strategies in tackling homelessness. Given the scale of public expenditure involved and the clear need for better outcomes, I propose, members, that we begin by asking the Housing Executive how quickly they will be able to react in light of the Minister's announcement, if members will be content with that.
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Members, just also to note, at this point, the Chancellor's Spring Statement 2025, which is flagging up further cuts to benefit and systems and supports for people, I think that's something that we will need to come back to in terms of the detail. And we have some letters in with the Minister and various other bodies that have obviously now even greater importance than they were when we first issued those. And just to reflect the concern that's out there around all of that. So lastly, members, in terms of the committee's ongoing work programme, the committee team received an email from the department late on Friday afternoon. It's contained there, page 5 of your pack, advising that in terms of departmental briefings for today's meeting, they were going to have to defer both the anti-poverty strategy and historic environment, culture and creativity briefings. You will remember that the latter briefing had already been deferred previously at the department's request. The department's email states these deferrals are due to the announcements that on welfare cuts and due to the impacts these have within the department, and that they are unavoidable. The department has now proposed the following: that we will have an anti-poverty strategy briefing mid to late April, and that the historic environment, culture and creativity, regarding to that briefing, that the department will make contact to arrange a more suitable date. So Kelly and then Sian.
Look, I appreciate that we can get people, somebody could be sick or whatever's going on. I don't think that having a budget could prevent, the work that has been ongoing on the anti-poverty strategy and the historic environment, culture and creativity briefing. So I'm really disappointed that they're not coming to see this committee. Now, I know they've talked about when they may be available, but we have other things that we're getting on with. I'm just wondering if there's another way that we can get access to this information, because at this stage we're not being offered any written alternative. is there a problem with the number of people who are working on these things within the department? It's just getting to the stage where it feels like as a committee we're being bypassed.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Sian?
Yeah, really disappointed. I think that we've been asking for an update on where we are with the anti-poverty strategy for a long time, even in terms of where the development of it is. I know that it's obviously, if the Minister is taking it forward to executive, there's been some issue there where he said that the executive has to see it before us, and I just don't understand how having announcements of a green paper or any changes in Westminster is impacting the work on an anti-poverty strategy to the point where the department cannot brief the committee that is designed to scrutinise and support it. In terms of the historic culture and creativity, I see no justification for another delay. It's a department, those that are working on the creativity and arts policy pieces, I don't believe are in any way involved in any work that is related to the most recent cuts or most recent announcements of cuts. I think this is now the third time that this has been deferred, if I'm right, Chair. And I think
In second.
Then, so I feel like we've been asking for an update from the department on this for quite some time. We're being told by those in the sector that they are told that these policies will be out to consultation before the end of this year, in terms of June. So if there's now 2 months, 3 months down the line, why are we not being updated on the work that section of the department is doing? So I'm quite frustrated.
Thank you, Sian.
Thanks, Chair.
Nicola?
I just want to agree with Sian and Kelly on what they've said there. This is very disappointing and concerning. And I suppose the fact that we have had these announcements on welfare cuts and the spring statement yesterday, and the huge concerns right across society how this is going to impact our most vulnerable, it actually means we really, it gives there's greater importance in us actually having evidence and detail on the anti-poverty strategy. There's a need for it now more than ever. So yeah, I share the concerns of both Kelly and Sian in that regard.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? We have a document, Timescales for Interaction between the Assembly Committees and Departments, and in that it says statutory committees play a pivotal role in ensuring the full and proper accountability of the Executive to the Assembly. We can't do that because we're not getting the information, and I just wonder, I'm sure you may well have an idea about maybe the Minister or what way we can take this forward, but we need to find out what is going on, why this committee is being set aside. If we are being prevented from delivering our role as a legal statutory committee, the question has to be asked. The media finds out things before us. There are announcements made left, right and centre, and we're provided with the press releases on it after the fact. So departments should be seeking to engage with us. Instead, they're refusing.
Yeah, and I think we will need to consider how, in light of the cancellation of these, how that ground gets made up and how that gets done. I think there's also, I would be very keen to know what the exact impacts are in terms of the number of people that have now had to be diverted to look at the issue of the statement, and what other impacts there are, what other work is not being done as a result of that. So I think it would be useful for us to write to find out what those impacts are. They're not detailed here. I'd like to see the detail of them, because obviously they're impacting not only on us but potentially on other work within the department. I also would be concerned to know that the deadline for the anti-poverty strategy, which is so long awaited now, is not going to shift in any way, and I think we should communicate our concern on that issue to the department as well, if members are content.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, members, you'll also recall that we had suggested a number of informal briefing sessions with officials. The DALO has informed the team that, having spoken with senior officials regarding the list of informal sessions, they have requested the following: that the Pension Schemes Bill, 8th of April 2025. There's a number of other ones, such as pinch points of HSS benefit fraud and error, regulatory framework for gambling, universal credit, complex lives and supporting people. So those were suggested by the department really as informal information sessions. They're now being scheduled as, or seeking to be scheduled as formal briefings. So I'm very disappointed with the cancellation and the timing of it late on Friday evening. That creates a huge amount of work for the team here to have to schedule a committee session at very short notice. And I want to thank the team for the work they've had to do at very short notice to put together today's meeting. Also, to point out that we were asked initially by the department to consider informal sessions in relation to topics that members of the committee continued to raise question and follow-up queries on. We had done one on universal credit that members, and I think the department, found useful. However, the position seems to have shifted now, leaving just one informal session for the pension scheme bill. So any comments, members, or anything you wish to note on that? Kelly?
I'm a little bit concerned about the approach here. The committee has matters and issues that it needs to consider, and we certainly, the list that has been provided are things that of course we should be interested in. It feels more like everything's being moved into informal discussion and being led by the department telling us what we should be considering, as opposed to what we as a committee are concerned about and need to look at. How many of these I just get worried about the informal sessions, because if it's not done with public scrutiny, of our work and how we're delivering as a committee and what officials are saying, I don't know, Chair. I'm getting a bit frustrated if our official meetings are being postponed and cancelled and these informal meetings seem to be taken over. This committee is effectively going into private session.
We're just saying, so the proposal from the department here is to move those into formal, and there is certainly merit in having those informal. They were sort of pitched as information sessions. They're going into formal sessions, and I think they're all crucially important issues. But it's just to flag up the department had asked for them. But it has also created serious problems with room bookings and things like that had been booked for these sessions. I think that's the more. But we certainly will look forward to being able to scrutinise.
Our papers are provided to the department. I'm sure they know what our forward work programme is. They know that they have legislation coming up. Are they controlling this committee?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Melissa, yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Just on exactly the same point, Chair, I think it's critical that we take responsibility as a committee, and that we set the agenda, and it is not set for us by either the department or minister or whoever. It's in fact this committee that takes responsibility for itself. They decide what it is that we're going to have our hearings on.
Yeah. Would members be content that we write also to the department in relation to those matters and expressing our dissatisfaction and pointing to the evidence sessions at the department that the committee has requested? There's an expectation that the department will facilitate those in the order they're requested. Brian?
Yep. Well, in terms of the list there, matters which the department's suggesting we could get briefings on and sessions on. I mean, many of these are things that have came up in the committee. Certainly with the other committee that I'm on, I mean, we do ask the department what is coming through, what are the matters that we need to be kept up to date on. So I don't think it's unreasonable that we are advised these are things that are coming through. And all of these, reading through the list, are things that have been raised at our meetings. There's a number there I would be interested in those sessions on benefit, fraud and error, the gambling framework, complex lives, supporting people. So are we being asked to select from these, or are we saying all of these go through, or do we put that into our forward planning session at some stage?
So first of all, on that respect, we have asked for information around the legislative timetabling for the department, which we're waiting on. But these sessions have been what has been sent to us on Friday afternoon. These were being moved from informal sessions into formal sessions, and we will work those in. The point about that is coming so late in the day, and I'm making the point that the department had asked for them to be informal. The department had asked for that, and we had agreed to that on the basis of that they were to share information. But however, that is the case now. But I think in terms of planning and scheduling, it is crucial that the committee team here are able to have a certainty around key briefings, and I think that point needs to be should be referred back to the department. Kelly,
my concern is if the department are moving these into formal session, which is not a bad thing, are they going to turn up? Because we're seeing that they're not turning up when we've asked them to do other things. So it's that level of communication and trust between us and the department. We've had discussions with the department on this and raised our concerns, and they've certainly fed into us their concerns too, but it doesn't really bode well when this is the third time that we can't get two change dates coming through, and the third time that part of the department can't provide us with an update on something as important as the anti-poverty strategy is being knocked back. So I just would be concerned if we could communicate back to the department, love the list, we may have more to add to that, but are you actually going to turn up?
Yeah, and just to note that we have replaced that session with people who have worked on the anti-poverty, so we can draw some more of that out in the session today. Nicola?
Chair, was there any justifications to why they moved it from informal to formal, or what was the reason behind it?
No, I don't think there was really any rationale given for that.
It really doesn't seem to make sense. If our forward programme is already jam-packed, is this going to push it way down the line so that we don't get to actually hear from these ones for a long time, whenever they are issues that, as Brian said, has come through committee before, and we do want to get more information on, just to furnish ourselves with that information. So it is a bit peculiar now, I do think.
Well, listen, I'll ask the clerk to do us up maybe a bit of a report when she's back in terms of the impact and how that might be managed, because there is certainly going to be, given the very packed schedule that this committee has, any of these changes create significant knock-on difficulties, and that's not good enough, to be quite frank. Okay, members, thank you for that. Moving on then to agenda item 3, draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes from the meeting on 20th of March, which are page 7 of the meeting pack? Are members content to agree the minutes of 20th of March as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Matters arising then, members. You've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 18. I will, as usual, go through these items by number and group and ask viewers to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item. So can I ask members if they have any comment on items 4.2 to 4.6? Go ahead, Sian.
Just 4.3, the reply on bringing welfare reform mitigation statutory report. I welcome just getting some of those figures. I think that was one of the informal briefings that we actually had asked to have, was really understanding where this fraud is coming from and how it's being dealt with. And I mean, for me, I agree with the narrative that we've heard around that £163 million being channeled through customer fraud is unacceptable. I do, however, challenge the narrative that it's being conflated with these cuts, and particularly people with disabilities. I will challenge that all day long, because I think there have been a conflation of the two. We have to address fraud, but we also have to address error. £26 million on department error. I haven't really heard an awful lot about it, and I know that we've talked in this committee about how, when that statement was brought forward by the Minister, we really did get an awful lot of focus on the fraud and not much on the error. So I think for me that's where the frustration comes, Chair, where we're pushing these briefings down the road, because it would be really helpful for us to understand where are the pinch points. Is it the computer system? Is it human error? Where's that coming from? And what is being done to nip it in the bud for next year? So it's more a kind of, I suppose, a comment than any sort of question for the department, but it underlines how frustrated I am that we're not getting some of those briefings.
Yep. Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, but just on that same matter, on the report on the welfare reform mitigations, I mean, the amount there that's put down as overpayments due to fraud, error or official error of £240 million is eye-watering. You know, when we look at the various other mitigations that we can't afford to cover from our block grant. And I know this is money that's coming through DWP, but there is, I understand, an opportunity through the Fresh Start agreement that money saved on benefit fraud can be retained within Northern Ireland, or at least a large part of it. And so I look forward to that briefing, and that we can find more about the potential for that. But I mean, there's a serious concerns just about the public purse there, you know, that they, and how that can be reduced and eliminated.
Thanks, Brian. Melissa? Lanneray?
Just on 4.2, Chair, to express my disappointment that once again, like if the 419 additional jobs that have been allocated to Belfast. That it's worth noting that the vast majority of these jobs are suitable for hybrid working, which will allow staff to avail of working from both the office and from home. And in particular, in the likes of West Tyrone and Fermanagh, we could have benefited from a relocation of many of those particular posts there. And once again, it's a whole area that has been ignored.
Yep, I think that's definitely something that I would be concerned about as well. And in fact, we were told at the time of the announcement that there wasn't the infrastructure in either Tyrone, Armagh, or Fermanagh, and yet it turns out that a hybrid was a possibility. So that doesn't really chime with what we were told at the time. In relation to the fraud and error there, so I've maybe asked the clerk to look at when we can get that scheduled in. There's obviously concern around that, so we'll see how we can get that worked into the forward work programme. Okay, members, then anything else on 4.2 to 4.6, or am I okay to go ahead, Shannon?
Apologies, Chair, it's just under the Children's Services Cooperation Act at 4.5. Understand why we're throwing it back over to the Department for Finance, but it would be good to hear from the department in terms of how CSCA is actually currently being used, because we do know that this will have a huge impact on how an anti-poverty strategy will be rolled out, especially around children's services and anything to do with child poverty. So I think there is a question to be answered there from the department. I'd like to know at the minute what is going on in terms of how they're utilising that piece of legislation to ensure that children are being kept at the forefront of any legislation that's come through, particularly around anti-poverty. So I appreciate that Department for Finance looks after the arrangements and the outworkings of that piece of legislation, but there's also some input needed there from the Department for Communities. So I would suggest, if possible, that we go back to the department and just say, can we get an outline of what is currently being done within the department around that piece of legislation?
Yeah. I thought it was curious wording. They may wish to use the potential of the Children's Services Cooperation Act. Like, I would have thought it would more they will take full account of the requirements of the Act. I thought would have, it seemed a strange way to put it. So if members are content, we seek, as Sian has suggested, some further detail from the department. Yep. Members content? Thank you. You content with it?
We will take that forward, Chair.
Yep. Okay, members, then item 4.7 to 4.8. Are there items within that? I do want to flag up item 4 comment on 4.8, and there's a response to a letter that we sent here to TEO on the importance of co-design in developing strategies. And I mean, co-design is a fundamental built into the New Decade New Approach agreement. It's also best practice in terms of policy setting. That was redirected to the Department of Finance, an approach that I wouldn't be content with. I think if we sent a letter to TEO, we should get a response from TEO. I don't think the letter even went the length of TEO. It was redirected to Finance, so just wanted to take members' views on that.
In the last mandate, I would have been part of the discussion with the Executive Office on co-production and co-design and how much work had been done across the departments to understand that work and the working together. So it is quite surprising that it's being directed to Department of Finance. I don't know why it's going to Finance, because I know that there's things about personnel issues and stuff. HR would be in Finance, but co-production and co-design is an executive way of working, that goes across all departments. So it is a bit surprising. I suppose we'll have to wait until we see what Department of Finance come back with, but it sort of doesn't get to the understanding of what the intent and the intention and how co-design and co-production is understood by civil service.
Yeah, and I think I think we should reiterate that we want this correspondence going to TEO as well. Okay, share it with Finance by all means, and let's hear from both of them. But I don't think redirecting it in that sense is appropriate. It should go now. If TEO come back and say they have asked Finance to pick up or whatever, that's fair enough. If that has merit, we'll look at that. But I don't think just it simply being diverted at that level is really appropriate. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, well, just on that topic, I mean, we had some of this debate when the panel was in. I suppose it is the need to ensure that there's an understanding of the process when there's a co-design group or an expert panel, what their role is. And as I said, and I think the panel members who were in accepted at some stage it has to go into a departmental process and ultimately go to the executive committee and go to the Assembly. It has to go into a political process. So there's an understanding of what their role is, but also when it becomes a political, where it's through elected representatives, who are appointed by the people, when we're setting public policy. So this is a debate that keeps coming up about political accountability and setting public policy. So I'd accept there's a need for proper terms of reference, so it's understood what the role is of co-design groups, and maybe that's why it was referred to Department for Finance. Maybe whether there is a standard terms of reference, so the role is understood.
Well, this committee has made it very clear that we expect the people who contributed to the various strategies would be maintain contact with. The process, the more fundamental process of co-design, is one which I also believe this committee is broadly supportive of and wish to see continue. Any thoughts, members, on that?
I think it's that point. Brian makes it well about the groups that come in to see us. It's not clear. And it's not clear across all the departments of how co-production and co-design is being used and handled, and that's why we're looking for this information. If we have a clear outline of how the expectations are of the use of co-production and co-design, and that takes into Brian's point as well about the groups that are involved and what are their role and what are the expectations, then that makes it a lot easier for us to see if the process is working, or if it isn't working, or if it breaks down at some point, or there's a decision to move away from it at some point when that's not in keeping with the process. So that's why we're trying to get to the core of this. I don't think Department of Finance will have anything to do with the terms of reference with the groups that any department bring in, because it will be for the department to set that, because it's their process. It'd be different if it was a contract, because then that would go through procurement, but these guys aren't getting paid. They're coming at this being asked to contribute to something out of their own time, out of their own organisation's pockets at some cases, to pay for people to be available to respond. So that's why we need the system and to see if that works. And to be honest, at some stage, if we can't get to the bottom, but maybe we need to engage colleagues at the Executive Office Committee, I think you're on that, to see if they have access to this, because it is New Decade, New Approach, a process that was agreed then for the whole executive. So,
Sean?
I just feel like there's clearly something that's not working in this process. We now have those involved with the gender equality strategy, those involved with the Irish language strategy, those involved with the disability strategy, and the arts sector, who was widely consulted on investing in creative delivery. Those are the most recent examples where people have invested their time, often in overcapacitated sectors like the community model sector, the arts sector, and they've invested their time, and they feel, and they told us, each one of those groups involved told us they felt disrespected, they felt discarded, and they felt that their work had been kind of cast aside. So whilst I totally agree, Brian, that there is a process and there is a timeline, and at some point it moves out of the hands of those who are working on it and into departmental kind of processes and the political process, there's something wrong in the communication of the process. If people are telling us they feel disrespected, that their time has been wasted, and I think we have to listen to that, and we have to understand there's something that's not working within our co-design processes. So to be told by the Executive Office that let's pass it over to one particular committee, I think it doesn't sit well with me.
So just to flag up to members, we have written to the Executive, separately to the letter I referred to earlier, we have written to the Executive Office asking around that process, and we're waiting a reply from that. There's an outstanding letter into that, so we should be getting more information in relation to that part of it. We should be getting more information back from the Executive Office. Brian?
No, and I would be keen to see that I think there should be standard terms of reference, so the rules understood. I mean, our letter was actually about terms of reference for civil servants too. So do those exist in a standard form? And and there was a comment made at our last committee meeting, which I felt was disrespectful of officials, and it's easy to make throwaway comments, and that's happened at committee meetings before. So I think members need to be careful about making accusations, of people who are not in a position to respond.
Okay, that's a separate item to this item here, so we'll be coming to that as well. Any other comments, members, in relation to items 4.7 to 4.8?
Just one last one on this one. Would it be worthwhile for us to ask the Chair's liaison group if any of the other committees have had sight of the written down process for co-production and co-design?
Yeah, members content?
It's just to see if all the committees are aware of it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thanks, members. So moving on then to, there are a number of further items on the matter rising in your table papers there, and they're at page 4 of your table papers, and those contain items 4.10 to 4.14. So can I ask if members have any issues within that they wish to flag or note or discuss? Yeah, members content. Okay, so members then content otherwise as per the memo. Thank you for that. Moving on then to agenda item 5, members, correspondence, and the correspondence memo is at page 91. There's a table correspondence memo at page 29 of your table papers. I'll go through as usual the items by number and group and ask if you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So first of all, can I ask if members have any comments on items from 5.2 to 5.5? Kelly, please.
Yeah, can I go to 5.2? Now, while this amount of money is very welcome and I wouldn't want any group not to get it, I'm a little bit concerned that it's restricted to the community and voluntary sector that are funded through communities. There are many other community and voluntary sector organisations that are funded by other departments and they're not in receipt of this support. If we could write, now the department's given that money to groups and that's wonderful, but why is it not the whole community and voluntary sector? Why is it just some groups who are very fortunate that they can get money through communities, but there are other community and voluntary sector organisations that don't? For example, community transport. They're funded through the Department of Infrastructure and they're not going to get any of this type of support. And there's other organisations that are funded through health. It's just to get clarification on the rationale on the decision making of this, is why it was just for one element of the community and voluntary sector, albeit they are the ones that are funded and connected to communities, and why, like, the Charity Commission list exists, why it's not all, and what the rationale is for deciding that. Yeah.
Members content? We seek that.
Yeah. Well, on the same topic, I just want to welcome that the payment has been made. I think we all would welcome it, and I suppose there has to be some process of deciding which groups get it. I mean, it's groups under the Department for Communities. So if it's related to health, that would be presumably for the department and the health minister. But so I think the groups that the department primarily engages with under the Voluntary and Community Division and Community Empowerment Division, at least there is a defined list then. Otherwise we just get into a process of endless lobbying, you know. So I think certainly the list I looked up and down, I saw all the main groups I'd be aware of within my constituency. And just to comment too, just to welcome the funding from Financial Transactions Capital funding to help support more properties under co-ownership to help 4,000 households buy their own home over the next 4 years. So along with the decision of buying properties to provide temporary accommodation, that's two positive developments, you know, on the housing front.
Kelly, you were looking?
Yeah, just to correct Brian.
The chair, Kelly.
Sorry, it's just the Department for Communities is responsible for the community and voluntary sector, including the Charity Commission, not just some elements of it. So that's why I'm asking. I haven't said that the funding that's being offered is wrong. It's fantastic. Thank you very much. I just need to know the process of how the decision was taken, that only those that are getting money from communities are entitled to it, but other community and voluntary sector who are doing services on behalf of government are not, and just why that decision was taken that way. Now, it could well be money, it could be the availability of information, although the Charity Commission holds all of their details. It could be written around all departments to find out who they are. It's just that rationale of why some and not others.
Okay, and we have agreed to seek that information. Okay, anything else in 5.2 to 5.5?
Sorry, Chair, 5.3, that pivotal report, it might be worthwhile. They've asked a question in it about what an integrated community will look like, and I know that the department does do sterling work when it comes to shared housing, but have they any plans to follow through on that type of community, building, especially as it's part of the TBUC outcomes and things like that? That would be really useful.
So seek that information from Pivotal?
From the department.
From the department.
Pivotal have asked that question. What is the department's doing? What are they planning to do? What does an integrated community look like for Department for Communities? Yeah.
Members content with that, Brian?
Well, just before we move on, I mean, the letter from the Minister, I've referred to this already, about if we're up to that number.
I'm coming to that in the next section.
Okay.
Coming to that in the next section. Okay, so members, I want then to move on to items 5.6 to 5.8. And I wish members to draw your attention to item 5.7, which is a letter from the Minister in relation to a comment made at our meeting of the 13th of March. Before I seek members' views on this, I just wish to say that I have no doubt that every member of this committee keenly feels their responsibility to scrutinise the department and advise and assist the Minister. My role in that endeavour as chair of this committee is to maintain good order in the proceedings. Members around this table will say things which others may not agree with, and it is most certainly not within my remit to limit or interpret points being made. So any further discussion on this is a matter for the member and the Minister, but is not a topic for this committee. It is, however, good to know the department is taking such a keen interest in our meetings. So, members.
Well, sorry, Chair, I was just struggling getting to the right page there. So, I think the letter is justified, and we all can make comments at times, but I'm aware when we're on a committee, and it's happened the other way around, where some experts who come, people's lived experience, come to give evidence and make comments about statutory organisations, and can make comments which mightn't be balanced, and trying to make a point, and then officials have to come back and refute that and say that they don't feel that is representative. So I think we all have to be careful, especially a lot of civil servants aren't in a position where they can respond to allegations that are made and criticisms that are made.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
Yes, just to say that I've noted the male members' comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, any other views on items from 5.6 to 5.8?
Can I just come in about the Balmoral show, please? I don't know what we're planning to do with it. I know that there'll be other departments and committees that might, be taking up the space. For instance, I imagine the DARE committee will be doing that. But I don't know, is there something there about us and reaching out to the rural community about the impacts of universal credit and how they're working with it? And I don't know if we have capacity, to be honest, to do it. But even if we could even feed into what the Committee for ERA are discussing, just to see if that comes up, if they want to share that information with us, if we're not taking a space ourselves.
Yeah, and I think the clerk had already checked out if it would be possible to do our meeting, but that slot will be gone. It may be worthwhile maybe asking the clerk to take a look at how we might engage, say, maybe around the sign languages bill, or, as you say, universal. I think there's a number of issues there. Rural housing, is another issue that has been raised quite frequently here. So maybe it will be an idea to see how committee staff could look at some kind of outreach or taking the opportunity to engage in some sense during that show. I know there's probably lots of us engaged in the show in lots of ways, and there's a highlight event in that sense. So maybe it's worthwhile asking the team to take a look at what might work in the interest of engagement.
I know that in the past Rural Support Network have been really good in now that was I engaged with them at the Ballymoney show and the Ballymena show, but didn't see them at the Balmoral show, so I can't say if they were definitely there, but they did a really great kind of engagement piece on universal credit. But I definitely think there's space specifically for like the universal credit element of farmers, I suppose the fluctuating what is the word, income, there we go.
That has been raised, indeed. Any other thoughts on that, members, or any other items within that group, 5.6 to 5.8?
Sorry, 5.6, Chair.
Yeah.
That financial provisions bill, there's information in that. I think we need to get a wee bit more on what that it seems a bit early at this stage. So the Financial Provisions Bill is going to include a piece on tenancy fraud. And there will need to be, obviously, we don't want fraud happening in any case, but I think we need to find out how that's going to be investigated and how that's going to work. It's a bit like the sanctions that could be coming through, you know, to stop abuse of the welfare system, but it'd be the same for the housing. We need to see, is that going to be the department? Is it going to be the housing executive? If it's the housing executive, how does that apply then to, you know, housing benefit paid in other tenures? I think we need to be a bit more detail on that one, and it might be early days, to be fair to the department on this, because it's part of that Financial Provisions Bill, but I'm sure that the department have fed into what could be possible.
So asking for further information on
from
that?
the communities,
Members content with that proposal? Okay, members, then moving on to tabled items, which are 5.10 to 5.3 and are contained at pages between 30 and 47 of your table pack. Do members have any items there that they wish to draw out? Or a particular 5.10 there does require a committee view in relation to reducing gambling harm. So would members... So members, if it's, I'll ask members if you wish to forward the correspondence to the all-party group as requested. Are members content with that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other items in 5.10 to 5.13, members, or are members otherwise content? Yep, thank you, members. Okay, members, so before we move into agenda item 6, we need to pause broadcasting for a few minutes just to get the interpreters in place for this session. So we'll ask the clerk to pause broadcasting, and that will take a few minutes.
Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.
Clerk will indicate when we're back in public session.
That's us back in, Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. And we are now moving into agenda item 6. Sign Language Bill, update on call for evidence and engagements. Members, you have been provided with a memo from the clerk at page 196. Can I ask members if members have any comments on the memo, or are you content that the committee's call for evidence is extended until 9th of May 2025? Kelly, go ahead.
Chair, I agree that we do extend to give the best possible opportunity for people to respond. My question is about our role during some of the participation events. Are we permitted as committee members to attend as observers? And if there's any possibility with those events, if it's not appropriate, then that's fine. But if we're able to attend the in-person events just to see and hear what's being said. I think that would be quite useful, but not to take part if that's possible. But whenever the dates and times and the venues are known, if that could be shared, if we are permitted to be observers, that would be really helpful. The other thing was I have been contacted by a few people that have started to sort of filter through information. I don't believe that they have been in contact with the committee. What would you prefer us to do with that information? Now, obviously, I need to get permission if it's okay to send those comments in, but it's just to know the process that we as members should follow with that one.
Well, on the first issue, first of all, to say absolutely, members not only are permitted, but are absolutely encouraged, and we certainly hope to have members at all of the sessions, and indeed all members as far as possible.
Chair, we've just got information in there. There are 3 in-person and 1 online event.
Yeah, okay.
So members will be invited specifically to all of those and will be encouraged to attend.
And if necessary, we will seek to maybe ensure that between us we are covering all of the events, so that we can feed back in some way. I will ask the clerk to give us information as to how any information coming in that way can be facilitated and included as part of the formal, just to see how that will be managed. Sian, you were looking in there.
Yes, it's actually just about those in-person meetings and just around the location of them. I know Foyle, Strabane, Omagh, Dungannon, Newry, Banbridge and Belfast. There is a big gap there, and it obviously covers that North Antrim, East Antrim area, which is quite vast. You're looking at over an hour to travel to Foyle, over an hour to travel to Belfast. So I'm just wondering if there's any capacity, if we are trying to be as inclusive as possible, to maybe look at something for that kind of mid-Antrim area. I just think that would be really helpful.
So could we ask that to be looked at? Yeah, members are content with that. Thank you, Sian. That's an important point of information. So can I ask then, just going back to the call for evidence that we're extending till 9th of May, are members agreed with that?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Thank you. We'll just take them again. Yep. So we'll just pause again for another moment or two.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.
That's us back in session, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk, and thank you, members. So we're resuming then at agenda item 7, and this is SL1, the Universal Credit, Personal Independence Payment, Jobseekers Allowance and Employment and Support Allowance, open brackets, Claims and Payments, close brackets, Amendment and Modification Regulations NI 2025, and these are contained at page 202 of your pack. The proposed rule, members, will move child maintenance deductions in the priority order that deductions are taken from universal credit. It also provides for the amendment of the current priority order by placing water charges below fines in the priority order to mirror the corresponding Department for Work and Pensions legislation and to maintain parity. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the Department to proceed to make the rule?
Yeah, I think I would welcome this in terms of ensuring that the parent with custody has no barriers put in place, or less barriers put in place, to actually get what is owed in terms of child maintenance. So I think this is positive.
Thank you, Sian. Members, otherwise then, are members agreed that the Department proceed to make the rule? Thank you, members. Okay. Agenda item 8 then, this is SR 2020 5. The period products Department for Communities specified public service bodies regulations NI 2025, and they're contained at page 211 of your pack. So members, we considered the SL1 at our meeting on the 30th of January when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Do members have any objection to the rule? No. Therefore, can I ask formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025, the period products, Department for Communities, specified public service bodies, regulations NI 2025, and recommends that it is affirmed by the Assembly. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 9 then, members. We're moving into our first briefing today, and this is by the NI Anti-Poverty Network. Members, a copy of the briefing paper is in your table papers at page 50. So I now wish to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we are being joined by Becca Bohr, who is Development Coordinator. And we are being joined by Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick, who is Vice Chair of the Anti-Poverty Network. So Becca, I think it's yourself that's going to make the opening remarks, and we'll then obviously get to questions from members. So thank you both, and thank you for appearing today at pretty short notice. I understand you're very busy yourselves, but we really appreciate you coming to committee in short notice like that.
Well, thank you for having us, and we're happy to be here today. And I just want to acknowledge that the importance of the mitigations package that has been extended right now for the next for the mandate, I think is just so important, and I just haven't seen you since then, so I wanted to acknowledge that. I heard Minister Gordon Lyons on the radio this morning saying that the anti-poverty strategy will be delivered to look at next week, and I look forward to that. Obviously, we wanted to hear about it all today, so it'll be good to hear that next week. Obviously, you know, since last we've been here that there has been a High Court ruling on a judicial review saying that the executive is in breach of Section 28E with its duty to adopt an anti-poverty strategy, and that is an anti-poverty strategy based on objective need. And so, again, the importance of it is no surprise to anyone. But I think one of the importance of this committee is to obviously make sure that any anti-poverty strategy is meeting the criteria of a strategy. And so you have amazing tools in front of you right now. You have the Public Accounts Committee recommendations around the child poverty strategy for you to use, as well as the audit report on that strategy. And I just want to remind yourselves what it says. For a strategy to be effective, there must be specific poverty reduction targets throughout the duration of the strategy. It needs to have focus, prioritization that's reflected in its monitoring. The DFC needs to lead and show leadership, but also it needs to be cross-departmental, and there needs to be joined up working. There must be a ring-fenced budget for delivery of the targets within the strategy, and the overarching framework should be invest to save, whereby policies that focus on early intervention and prevention should be prioritized. These should be the criteria for which you compare the anti-poverty strategy that you will see, whether or not it will be a good and solid strategy moving forward. There's deep concern regarding the exclusion of the co-design group moving forward and sort of a general exclusion of civil society. When the minister said that the outsourcing, this is a quote, public policy to lobby groups was something he was going to stop doing. And so we have a question from those of us within, civic society. What is the process now? What is that back and forth between yourselves and government in the department and those of us who have really are experts in the field, who have conducted a huge amount of research, who are in many ways the connection to lived experience when it comes to poverty and when it comes to different people. And so Northern Ireland Anti-Poverty Network, we have a lived experience advisory panel, which I meet with every 3 weeks or so. And I just wanted to share with you throughout this presentation just a few of their own concerns and thoughts, because I asked them if they had a chance to talk to the Communities Committee, what would they say? And they're concerned about the direction of the conversation around benefits, the conversation around poverty, the direction of the conversation around people who are entitled versus not entitled, and what that means in terms of a society that is compassionate and all of that. So we are concerned. Doing nothing is obviously not an option. We are seeing increased rates of child poverty. I anticipate, although I don't know because we haven't gotten the figures in yet for this year, but with the increase of rents within the private rental sector, we anticipate that there'll be an increase of poverty, particularly those who are in the private rental sector. We know that the impact of women is absolutely detrimental. They are not only the shock absorbers of poverty, they're also the managers of the household, they're also the carers of children and people who are often dependent on them, and that there's a huge amount of research that has done within the women's sector, particularly Siobhan Harding and the Women's Support Network around what does that impact actually look like. And then obviously we'll talk a lot about disability cuts in a moment. So it matters how we talk about people on benefits, and that dignity and compassion is at the front, and we're concerned about any focus on benefit fraud. We think that is wrong-headed. Only 2% of the DFC expenditure is on benefit fraud and departmental error. PIP fraud, as you know, is between 0 and 0.2%. It is so small in comparison to the real issues of poverty. People cannot make ends meet, and until you address the root cause of people not being able to make ends meet, having the whole conversation about benefit fraud is not only a distraction, but it's dangerous because it maligns people who are in poverty and makes people feel horrible. This is a quote from someone in our lived experience advisory panel. Why are we always being questioned or having to prove that we're entitled? If our doctors and medical team have diagnosed our illness or disability, there is no need for this whole process. It just puts us under pressure. Another quote, I feel like they're always trying to catch us out. Personal debt, as we heard this morning in the most recent a report from the Consumer Council and Advice NI is that it's increased by 42% in the last 4 years to £13,000. Another member of our lived experience panel, I just can't survive these days without being in debt. I rely on credit to afford my bills. Why are we made to pay more for bills like gas and electric and then hear about these companies that have made record profits or their CEOs' salaries have doubled? It's insulting. Utilities should be nationalized, and it's not something for people to profit on the backs of ordinary people. It's unfair. Half of households in poverty include a person with disability. And furthermore, more than 1 in 5 disabled people live in relative poverty in Northern Ireland. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the picture of disability, and Ciara is going to talk about the impact of the cuts that were announced yesterday. So the reality, as you know, is that disabled people in Northern Ireland, there's a higher percentage, 20% more of rates of disability and ill health than the rest of the UK. And there's an extremely strong correlation between the areas that saw the worst violence and the troubles, ongoing deprivation, and high rates of disability and ill health. PIP is supposed to be an equity payment, a payment to help people who have a disability live their lives and pay for that disability. And that equity payment is not even close to the cost of disability. So Scope Charity said the average cost of a disability is $1,100 a month. And the United Nations has criticized the UK at having a disability payment that is not enough for people to actually make ends meet. And so currently PIP payments range from $1,500 to $9,610 per year, which means that that's $800 a month if you are on the highest rate of PIP, which again is over £200 short per month of what it actually costs on average for a disability. So it's showing you just how the status quo is not enough. And that's why we see people, higher rates of poverty in the disabled population. There's a mental health crisis in Northern Ireland, as you are well aware of. I don't need to go into the stats around that. You can read the briefing, but we know that the relationship between poverty and ill mental health is well-founded, well-researched, and so the mental health crisis needs to be addressed rather than immiserating and impoverishing more people, which will again add to our mental health burden and the burdens of already stretched services. So our conversation has to be about supports, interventions, well-being, rather than cuts, sanctions, and further stigmatization. And the last thing I want to say is about jobs, because I think jobs is really important, and I imagine that in an anti-poverty strategy that you're going to be seeing, hopefully next week, there's going to be a lot about getting people into work. And so I think we need to look at what the evidence says around what we need around that. So first of all, policies need to ensure that they are person-centric, compassionate, and strive to understand and value the real lived experience of those impacted. Mm-hmm. For people who are disabled, research shows that those who are out of work want to work at a higher rate than those who are not disabled. And on average, disabled people submit 2.5 times as many job applications for fewer callbacks than people who are not disabled. So there are real barriers for getting even your first hire, so to speak. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with employers around reasonable adjustments, around stigma, around the idea that maybe it's going to cost too much or it'll be too much interruption to hire someone who is disabled. And I really encourage this committee to bring in voices from the disabled community over the next few weeks, a few months, around those barriers, understanding them, and so any intervention that is trying to get people into work is one that is based upon people's real lived experience. There's extensive research that place, train, and support in work rather than a job skills program where there's no employment or no concrete job at the other side is a much better strategy. It works a lot better for both employers and for prospective employees, and that's true within disabled communities, but also at large, young people, et cetera, people who are trying to get into work. So programs such as Steps to Success and a lot of the other programs that we're targeting young people needs, so not in employment, education and training. We're putting people through a variety of different jobs trainings, but there wasn't a job at the other end. And there's also a lot of work that needs to be done with employers around how do they change what their employment looks like to actually meet the needs of incoming possible recruits. There's also an issue of disparity across the region, and so you'll be well aware that west of the band there are fewer jobs, lower paid jobs, less flexibility. In rural areas in particular, more of a reliance on cars. Mm-hmm. Transport is a massive barrier for people with disabilities, but not just with people with disabilities, because people who are reliant on cars, it's more expensive to get to work, and for many people, they report it just doesn't pay to go to work because I'm out of pocket just far too much. So I'm going to move on to Kira to talk about the implications of the cuts, but we're happy to talk about sort of what are the things that we want to focus on in the anti-poverty strategy that hopefully you will see next week.
Thanks very much. Really pleased to be here today, so thank you. And first of all, I just want to reflect what Becca had said about the welfare reform mitigation package. Often, I've worked in social security and poverty for about 10 years now, and I feel so depressed most of the time about, the situation that we're currently in Northern Ireland. But actually, the welfare reform mitigation package as a devolved package of measures is something that I feel really proud of, because it's something that the Northern Ireland Executive decided to do that has made such a real difference to people who are at risk of poverty in Northern Ireland. And I just want to also mention the fact that, we did have some flexibilities around the introduction of the new benefit schemes, universal credit and PIP the last time. And, I think that that's something that could be very urgently looked at around these proposals. Even some flexibilities that aren't going to cost an awful lot of money would be a good starting point. And Minister Mervyn Story at the time worked with other organisations to look at what they could be. And I think, it's so urgent that we are in front of the curve here, because we do know that Labour does have a massive majority, and unfortunately, it looks like it's highly likely that these cuts are going to be pressed through, which is very worrying. It's very worrying for Northern Ireland. I'm going to just keep this to a few sentences. We've heard from the OBR that we're going to have at least 250,000 more people pushed into poverty. We have already organisations such as the JRF saying that that's a very conservative estimate. It's probably going to be more like 400,000 people across the UK pushed into poverty, including at least 50,000 children. We know in Northern Ireland that we have 29,000 children experiencing poverty where somebody in the household has a disability. We also know the knock-on effect of the average loss of 4,500 per year for those people that are going to be impacted by these cuts is also going to impact those people who have a carer in the household, because if they lose eligibility to PIP, they're also going to lose eligibility to carers allowance. It also lifts their protection from the benefit cap as well, so they're going to be impacted by that. So we're going to see the cost of that mitigation rise, because we're going to see more people, more households impacted by the benefit cap. I read a really interesting paper last night from Dr. Anne Devlin and colleagues from Queen's University, and the title of the paper is "Why Are Disability Rates So High for Older Working Age Adults in Northern Ireland?" Now, they concentrated on adults in the 50 to 64 age cohort, which is a really important age cohort because, pension age has gone up. We have a lot of people who are unable to work because of ill health and disability, and therefore they are claiming PIP, and they are likely to be impacted. The most important finding for me was that in other countries, and this is sort of the rationale that Rachel Reeves is using for the cut, where we see economic growth, we see the rates of disability claimants come down, and that's normally the pattern. But Northern Ireland has always been an outlier in that respect. So even when our economy has become stronger or has showed evidence of growth, we haven't actually seen the level of disability claimants come down. And a lot of that has to do with what Becca has already talked about, our weaker labour market, and the difficulties that we have had post-conflict. The conflict is a major influence here as to why our rates of disability claimants are so high. So, it's just not going to work. What Rachel Reeves has put out there, that, we're going to drive growth, we're going to improve jobs for people, and we're going to invest 1 billion. It's not going to have the same impact here in Northern Ireland, which is why I know you're all on the same hymn sheet in saying that we're going to be disproportionately impacted here, and we really are. And this is layered on top of really tight times over the last 5 years. Just a couple more quotes is, really worried about the changes to cuts and disability support. It's already stressful having to fight for everything. And the other one that I wanted to mention was the £20 UC payment during COVID really made a difference for me, as did the holiday payments for children. They took these away while the price of everything continued to go up. Everything has only gotten worse. So our baseline is so treacherous at the minute. We've had the COVID-19 pandemic. We did see additional support which really worked. The holiday hunger payments, which research from Queen's showed really took the stress off low-income families. We had the £20 top-up payment, which lifted thousands of people out of poverty for that period of time. But now we had that taken away, and we're continuing to be in this period of inflation where the rate of fuel and energy and food and those basic essentials for people are very high, and it's really making it so difficult for families on low and middle incomes to live. And the other thing that Becca didn't mention about employment and where we're so behind other parts of the UK and is childcare. And I don't need to tell you that, but it is so vital. And you know, we've heard from the Women's Budget Group that again, we're going to see the sharpest end of these cuts fall on women because they're most traditionally carers. You know, they're really looking after. They're more likely to be looking after their disabled relatives and friends. And without childcare, without social care, you know, they're not just going to be able to go out into the workplace, as you well know. So that's all I want to say, and just to say that we really need to be in swift mode in terms of planning for how Northern Ireland deals with these cuts and how we ensure that we protect those people that are in poverty and who are so often silenced and can't speak for themselves around the pain that they're experiencing at the minute.
Okay, thank you, and that's really detailed briefing actually, and very, very welcome from that point of view. It has put a wee bit of pressure in times. We'll just ask members to be as succinct as possible in terms of question and answers. But I suppose returning to the anti-poverty strategy, so that strategy was largely drafted in 2022, but it would seem that there has been almost a starting from scratch and a huge redraft in terms of strategy. Would you agree that a substantial redrafting is likely to have occurred at this stage from your understanding?
Yeah, so this is just information that came out in the High Court, and we didn't have any view of anything really except for what was in the High Court, and it's in the timeline that was sort of discussed then. Basically made it seem to us, again, we don't have inside information, was that the minister did not take what was a draft, forward, which is his right to do, but that there wasn't all that much urgency really until the autumn, after the pre-court paper was delivered by CAJ saying that you might be in, the executive might once again be in breach of the legal duty to implement an anti-poverty strategy. And then there was beginnings of work of timeline of bringing together a cross-departmental group and things like that. And that was also when we saw Gordon Lyons say that it looked as though it would be brought forward by the end of this financial year, which if he delivers it the beginning of next week, he will have, kept his word, but it doesn't look like it will be reflective of the past work of either the co-design group or the expert panel, which we find very, very concerning.
I would also just say, there's a history of so much of this. People in the civil society have put in so much time and effort into various processes. So I sat on the expert independent group that looked at discretionary support, for example. Mm-hmm. We had a committee of people that looked at welfare reform mitigations. We had a poverty, anti-poverty co-design group. All of these groups have taken a lot of time to look at these issues for the interests of people in Northern Ireland. We've poured a lot of research into it. There was a lot of work done prior to the executive coming to an end, and it's gotten. It really is hugely disappointing that our work has been disregarded and that it's not being brought forward in any form at all. And we are working on the ground with people who are in poverty, so to feel so undermined like that is really disappointing.
Yeah, and I can tell you that the committee already this morning have referred to this issue several times, and we have taken several actions in terms of engaging around this very issue. I have to say, I think it's a mistake. I think co-design is where there is real value for departments. I'm on the record for that, and co-production. And actually, I think it should be a reiterative process rather than a one-off event. I also think that the reference to lobby groups is in itself reductive and inaccurate and not helpful in that sense, because these are often people who are experts by experience and represent those patient voices. I think it's also very interesting the debt figures that you flagged up, Becca. To me, those are potentially a ticking time bomb in relation to all of this, and potentially covering up some of even the worst impacts. People aren't coping, they're getting further into debt. And in the midst of all that, we drop in this narrative around disability and removing supports. And actually, and I have been on the record publicly in this, dressing that up as an attempt to assist people back in. Some of the people who have actually been excluded from work very unfairly over many years and would welcome support into the work. But really what we're seeing is a balancing of the books and to try to dress that up. But given the cost of living crisis, I think this is an entirely different context from any of the other times in the past when also poor decisions were made, but they're much poorer now given the context we're in and unsustainable. And I would again call on the British government to not move forward with those cuts because they are going to create so many issues.
Just a very quick point on the debt. Christians Against Poverty, it's important for the committee. Their research has found that with the people that they have supported with the debt, that the biggest debt for them, for people in Northern Ireland, is actually social security debt. Yeah. So, it's really important, and as people continue to migrate onto universal credit, you know that one of the Cliff Edge coalitions asks is around the 5-week wait in universal credit, and we've been waiting such a long time to see just the name of the contingency fund change to the universal credit new claimant fund.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a correspondence that is in process. We have raised that issue before. Final one for me before we go to members. What do you want to see in terms of actions in the anti-poverty strategy?
I think first and foremost, the anti-poverty strategy in terms of actions needs to have investment at the very forefront and has to have investment in sort of the cyclical nature of people's lives. So we need investment in children, first and foremost. We need investment in making sure that there is no child that is growing up in poverty, which means seeing an increase in benefits for children, getting rid of, obviously trying to find some kind of mitigation for the 2-child policy, but also making sure that there's a free school day, implementing a childcare strategy so that it's not just that people can go back into work who have small children, but also so that children have equitable, fair, good access to childcare and to developmentally appropriate learning. I think that's one thing. We need living wages. We need living wages and good working conditions so that people can work can actually be a pathway to get out of poverty. We're not seeing that right now. There needs to be a lot more work, I think, with employers to make sure that there is more flexibility for employees, that there are higher wages, that things like transport to work, investment in public sector in terms of transportation and public transport is increased significantly and subsidized so that people can have access to it. And then obviously housing, that's a massive issue. But a lot of the people on our lived experience panel actually talked about how important housing is in terms of, there's so much money is going to these private landlords, the B&Bs. This was all over the news, obviously, this week. But why can't we put more of this into building new homes, which I know, obviously, the department is attempting to take forward. But everything feels so temporary because of this. It doesn't give me the space to think long-term about employment or anything because I don't know where I will be living. The connection between housing insecurity, ill mental health, and then adverse childhood experiences and long-term increased likelihood of a bunch of different ills, whether it's poverty, lack of employment, etc., is well documented and well researched. We have over 5,000 children in temporary accommodation right now. This is the ticking time bomb in terms of long-term ill health and not being able to sort of escape poverty.
I'm currently engaged in the Labour government's child poverty strategy. I'm on the expert group representing Northern Ireland, and it's clear that at a very baseline measure, we need to get rid of the 2-child limit in universal credit. And what I would say is that we have had, an excellent framework of measures that have come out in the review of the welfare reform mitigations. It's a good starting point. Some of the investment that was included in the review. It wasn't huge amounts of money, and it could make a huge difference. The other thing I would say is you know, the anti-poverty strategy, we need to see social security used as a lever. We need investment in the social security system. That is the main lever to take people out of poverty. And if we don't see that in an anti-poverty strategy, you know, it's going to be really devastating.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to our Deputy Chair, Nicola Bro.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ciara and Becca, for attending here on short notice as well, as we do appreciate. It's such an important issue, and we are really glad to have you here. Listen, the statistics and all that you've been saying today, it's so concerning for so many throughout our society. Like, we know the effects of poverty in society anyway, and these announcements from the British government this week about the impact of the welfare payments and all, they are really concerning for so many people, and I am really concerned with what's just around the corner. But it is good to have you here and discussing it. And that leads me on to my first point. Freddie talked about the removal of the co-design group and developing the strategy. It makes no sense to me. No matter what strategies I've worked on before, you need to have the people on the ground, the experts in the field, to be part of their discussion, to be creating it and co-designing it. To me, that makes total sense. And so I share your frustrations and concerns in the fact that it's been removed. And in that, in those terms, can you tell me what engagement you've recently had with the Minister or with the Department in regards to the anti-poverty strategy?
Specifically, I've had no personal engagement, but it should be said that, you know, I haven't, for example, written to the Minister to ask for a meeting or anything like that. So, you know, it's not that I would expect that engagement. You know, I am also, Becca and I are also part of the Cliff Edge Coalition, and, you know, we've been campaigning since 2018 to extend and strengthen the welfare reform mitigations, and we haven't had any engagement with the Minister around that either, and we hope to in the future. But yeah.
I just want to add about the anti-poverty strategy. We're waiting. And we're waiting, and we're waiting, and that is the entire reason why there was the High Court case and why there was the judicial review, because we can't keep having conversations without looking at a document, you know, and there's no point continuing to do that. So, again, next week, I'm hoping that there's something that we can actually have a conversation about, because for the last, you know, year, we've been talking about something we actually longer than a year, because even the co-design group never saw what the department was working on. They just published. Some members published their recommendations, and so I think that's really important. Is that we actually have never worked with something concrete from the department.
Well, again, we share those frustrations as well. Like, we were expecting to get a briefing from the department today on this here, and as I said at the beginning of the meeting, the fact that these reforms, the announcements for these reforms have come in, just amplify the need for this strategy, and we really need to get moving on it instead of next week. We want to see it now and actually get scrutinising and working on it and making it better, or having sight of it to work with the department to get the outcomes that we actually all want to see.
Very true, because I think the Minister said this morning, and he's entirely right, you know, the goalposts have massively shifted now. Yeah. This is a brand new challenge that has been laid on the table, and it's actually probably going to necessitate looking at the anti-poverty strategy and seeing how it can be used to support those people that are going to be impacted by this set of disability cuts.
We worked before on the childcare strategy. We've discussed that there, and I suppose just going back to that and going back to other initiatives that you talked about, the holiday hunger payments, the excess school uniform, the initiatives around that as well, and that the £20 payment. Like, where would you like to see all those kind of come together and this year anti-poverty strategy to help children and families mostly? Yeah,
it's so important. Like, I think that the scale of the cuts on children, even just from 2023. You'll remember that we had no executive at the time, and Chris Heaton-Harris instructed that we had to fit into a very narrow budget, and then we had the permanent secretary of the Department of Education make so many serious cuts, and I worked with colleagues across education and psychology to look at the impact of those cuts. And again, we've seen the removal of the holiday hunger payments for 96,000 children. We've seen the removal of so many important schemes that were designed to close that COVID-19 gap that were totally stopped. And that's had, again, the biggest impact on our most deprived communities. And it's those deprived communities that are being lashed over and over again. And we are going to pay the price for this in the long term, you know, because we are seeing much more pressure on our mental health services. We're not seeing the investment that we need to see in mental health services. You know, according to my colleague, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, about 5 million this year. We needed 61 million. At all levels, it's going to be really disastrous. And we talk about educational underachievement. The key driver of that is poverty. And unless we deal with child poverty, which has significantly risen relative child poverty from 18% to 24%, from 1 in 5 children to 1 in 4 children now being in poverty, that is so serious. And I'm not seeing the urgency across our government around that. Even small measures like us having the lowest uptake of the NHS Healthy Start scheme, which we found in our research. The Healthy Start scheme is run by the NHS, and it's designed to help low-income parents afford milk and fruit and vegetables. Our uptake's in and around 50% compared to the other nations where it's up on 75%. And that's just a failure to adequately really promote and engage with that scheme, and making sure that there's working across the Department of Health, across education, across community, that joined up thinking and working to at least make sure that people in Northern Ireland are making best use of the scanty schemes that do currently exist.
I think I have to move on.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
Thank you. Shan, and then I'm going to Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thank you both so much. I think here we probably talk more about poverty and these cuts than I think anything else we've ever talked about. And I want to thank you both genuinely for your passion and your commitment to those who are suffering most. I'll get straight into it. In terms of the changes that are proposed, I think it's. You're right, Ciara. Labour majority is far too big to ever overthrow this, unfortunately. So some measures will be coming in. If we were to pick out any to really target in terms of trying to get them either mitigated or overthrown, what, in your opinion, would they be? And secondly, on the cuts, is that we've seen mitigations being put in place potentially in England and Wales in the form of investment, mental health sector, sector, childcare, as you've mentioned. What do we need to be seeing happening in other departments here in Northern Ireland to mitigate that? And then I'll come back.
So I think the thing about these cuts is that they're doing away with the work capability assessment. So that means you have to qualify for personal independence payment in order to get access to the health element of universal credit. So really that's where mitigations become tricky, because you can't pick just one part to mitigate, because now they're interlinked and they're joined together. So really we need to look at that requirement to achieve 4 points on a daily living descriptor, and we have to start modelling what the cost of not putting that in place would be, and if we kept the current PIP assessment, what that would look like over the next number of years in terms of how much that would cost the Northern Ireland Executive, or how much it would cost here. In terms of what we need to do, I'm on record as saying that we simply don't have the public service infrastructure to deal with the fallout of these cuts, and we're going to make an absolutely deplorable situation that we're already in terms of NHS waiting lists, the mental health crisis, the situation in justice, in social services, in social care, in that transition. One of the most frightening cuts for me is the fact that those young people between 18 and 22 aren't going to be able to access the health element of universal credit just because of their age. You know, it's a very arbitrary measure that Labour is bringing in. The most vulnerable groups of people, like care leavers, for example, who have PTSD, mental trauma, they're going to be destitute. So who's going to be able to support those people? Because they're going to have less independence, and they're going to need more support with being able to navigate, I suppose, charitable organisations to be able to get, to find means to survive. So it's really important that we look at mitigating all of it, because they're so linked together.
I just want to say, I also think that it's not a done deal yet, and I think we need to act like this is something that can we can do something about. And I think that if Stormont, and I know that actually every party has been quite articulate around that this is bad for Northern Ireland, bad for people with disabilities, but I actually think we need some creativity around what we can do. You are our elected reps, and we need as much noise and as much righteous anger while also planning, around what do we do in terms of some mitigations. But I think saying, oh, this is a done deal is a mistake, because there are disabled campaigners all over these islands who are fighting and trying to actually make sure that these aren't implemented. Absolutely. And I think that as elected reps, you have to stand shoulder to shoulder to, disabled people against the cuts and other organizations, and you need to bring them in here and talk to them and find out all the things that they're doing in order to campaign, because it's not a done deal, and we can't pretend it's a done deal, because, every crisis has to have a resolution, and hopefully if there's enough of a outcry around the specific elements of this that are so undignified and are so detrimental for the long-term sort of health, not only of people with disabilities, but also all of our public sector and our infrastructure, then I think that there is wiggle room for this to be changed.
And I think we can work really strongly with our other devolved nations,
Listen, we have written to our counterpart committees in this respect. We are hearing that there's significant concern even within the Labour Party, so I absolutely agree. We should not allow the British government just to treat this as a done deal.
Thank you for challenging my lack of hope.
I'm going to have to move on then to Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, folks. I think my reaction to the budget, and we knew sort of what was going to happen because of the announcement the previous week, but that was just to help to take the sting out of the Chancellor when she was coming up with her ideas. But here in Northern Ireland, I have some concerns about the Green Paper that came out and ultimately what has happened. So just taking you to it, we don't have a disability employment strategy, we don't have a disability strategy, we don't have a gender strategy, we don't have age, we don't have all of that. We have no strategies in place at this moment in time. The anti-poverty strategy could be an underpinning element even of all of those strategies. My concern is that the anti-poverty strategy, even when it does come forward, it's not in time for a budget for next year. So we will have people who will already be feeling the impact of the cuts at some point. My other concern is about sanctions. And we know that there is an intention to sanction people. An intention to sanction, not to make the best system that is inclusive as possible, but to sanction people. The Green Paper included discussion about employment supports that they have been piloting and using across the water, and says blatantly in it that Northern Ireland, it's devolved, it's nothing to do with us. So it doesn't even look like we're going to get a cut of Barnett consequentials on this one. Should we in Northern Ireland as a government be upholding the same sanctions that will be introduced through Westminster here, given the fact that we don't have the policies and the processes in place and the strategies and the employment supports for those people?
In short, absolutely not. And I think, with the last welfare reform mitigations, the Northern Ireland Assembly took a very different approach to sanctions. And that was very welcomed, that they would engage with the individual at least 3 times before a sanction should be considered. And obviously very proud that Northern Ireland took that different approach, because the research shows over and over again that sanctions just don't work. We know one of the targets, we know people who are going to be targeted by these cuts to disability are people who have mental health issues, like depression and anxiety, and people who have neurodiversities. Look, I can speak from a personal perspective on this. I have a sister who has learning difficulties and neurodiversities, and as the proposals are at present, is most likely going to lose her disability support that gives her autonomy and independence from her carers, us. I think if she was to engage in employment support, she really wouldn't have the capability to do that. It wouldn't be that she doesn't want to do it. It just she wouldn't be able to engage in that. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about, digging deep into the green paper and looking at, how we can provide a more compassionate response to some of those proposals that are in there around how we're going to engage with people, because yes, all these people are going to be suddenly brought into this really intense conditionality. And look, I've been engaging with the department around this because we now have in-work progression, and we know that work coaches are quite intently getting in touch, particularly with single parents who are working maybe 10, 16 hours a week, and trying to get them to increase their hours, and
with no childcare
or sub-parity in childcare. And I know that the senior civil servants I've been engaging with have been really helpful, and have been saying we have been explaining that we are different from the rest of the UK, but we can't help what some of our work coaches are taking in from wider society and wider media around what the regime is like in other parts of the UK. So it's really important that there's a specific position on that, and that's really firmly communicated to our work coaches and civil servants in Northern Ireland.
Just then, Becca, thank you very much for, at the start when you talked about the sort of things that we as a committee should be considering and the questions we should be asking about a strategy when it eventually comes forward, because it seems to be that the strategy will just appear. We haven't had a chance to see a draft of that, and the working groups have explained to us about feeling set aside with some of those strategies. Ciara, you've just talked there about the need to engage with people. Can I ask you, what damage have we done with engagement through the failure to deliver co-production and co-design? Will we get back that excellent work that was handed over by the community and voluntary sector and organisations because of the way this has been handled?
I would say there's significant damage, and I don't think that things are ever irretrievably fixed. Things can be fixed, but I do think that there is a huge feeling of dismay, despair. People put a huge amount of work, and then it's also just feeling completely unvalued. And this is on top of people who are already doing a lot of research, doing these consultations, left, right, and center, submitting detailed consultations to, every month, doing research amongst their people with lived experience, and then feeling like even the messaging is not even getting, heard or taken up, or the main points aren't even talked about. I mean, this is sort of ongoing, and I feel like civil society, we can't scream any louder. We've been screaming, and I think that there's a real sense of we want to work in partnership. We want to see the work that we're doing reflected in policies. We also want to, we know not every policy is not going to be perfect. Actually, no policy will be perfect when it's implemented, and that there needs to be avenues around monitoring, assessing, come back and changing, fixing. That is how it works. And that if you shut down civil society and in our engagement, with that, then it'll be very, very hard. And it's also, we're constantly talking to people with lived experience and saying, tell us how this works for you, or this doesn't work for you. And it's like, there's going to be a certain point where they're like, stop asking us and stop bringing us forward to talk about all these different things, because nothing you're doing is changing it.
And that has happened.
And that has happened time and time again. And I know, the lived experience panel, our advisory panel, just last week we had a conversation, and someone said, we've been having these meetings every 3 weeks. Do you think anything you've done has actually made a difference? And, I was like, of course. But I actually think that that's a legit question, because her life is getting worse right now. because of the attacks on people in benefits, low wage work, etc., cost of living continuing to go up, rents going up. Her reality is that things are getting worse, and so
Absolutely.
Sorry.
And it can never be allowed to become a tick box exercise, and in some ways actually saying we're not even going to tick the box anymore. Fully agree with that.
Morale's just really low in the community and voluntary sector at the minute, because so many of our colleagues are even on redundancy notice, you know. So then adding to the fact that the views that they've, you know, pushed forward over the last 2 years aren't being valued is obviously very offensive.
Thank you. Ryan, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in today at short notice and for your paper. Thank you for updating us on the comments from the Minister. I hadn't heard that Gordon Lyons had said that this morning. I was busy reading papers for the committee. So I think you're saying that the strategy is expected
next week.
You'll bring it forward next week. So okay, that is good news. Obviously, people will have views on it. I hear some criticisms from various people in this debate that haven't seen the strategy yet, so we look forward to seeing it, and then people will have their comments on it. In terms of the co-design, I mean, as the Chair said, we've been discussing that today for people to understand the terms of reference for co-design process, and I think ultimately I've made the point that it has to go into a departmental and a political process, and I think that decisions about public policy and public finances ultimately need to be made by elected representatives, you know, and I think ultimately that is why those decisions have to be made, and that's the nature of democracy. So I mean, I would push back at one of your titles there, exclusion of civil society, you know, but that there will be an ongoing debate about that. In terms of what you've said, we've had two blows to people this week, you know, the Green Paper. And again, the Spring Statement yesterday focused government at Westminster just wanting to make cuts to disability-related benefits, and we know that will impact huge numbers of people who are vulnerable. Will be more people in poverty because of that. So all parties will be doing what we can to speak against that and identify the consequences. And the Green Paper was titled Pathways to Work, and certainly, I mean, it is my view, it's my party view that people who are able to work should be working and should be enabled and supported to work. And we're aware that that's not possible for everyone, but there should always, it requires resource to be put into that to provide employability support and to ensure that employers are making the adjustments required. So we will be pushing to see the resource
put
in.
Brian.
Yes, my question is for that assistance for people into work. Would you point to some examples where you think the right sort of support is being provided? And we are aware of various organisations across Northern Ireland, including the voluntary community sector, you know, who provide, like the Now Project, who provide support for people with disabilities and health-related issues.
I mean, again, I think the Now Group does amazing work, and that's a really good example. Again, I can speak to personal experience. My sister was helped into work by an organisation called Triangle, which is based in Mid-Ulster, where I live, and she had a personal advisor that was such a good intermediary between like our family and the workplace, because we did have a lot of teething issues because of her neurodiversity, and we were able to get that personalised support, and she was able to advocate for my sister, you know, to her employers about making small adjustments that would help her settle into the workplace. But again, that was funded by the European Social Fund, and we lost all of that investment, and unfortunately my sister lost that personalised support straight away. Now her employer has been able to keep her on, and you know, she's being paid minimum wage, she's doing 4 hours a week, but I don't think that the employer would have the capacity to support her for longer hours without that intermediary to, you know, help through those issues, because, you know, I think they're doing a real job of work at the minute, sustaining her employment, and it would be really difficult.
Yeah, and just last comment, I mean, we're aware of those groups that had ESF funding then on shared prosperity funding, which has now been cut by 40%. And some of them, hearing this week, that some of them aren't going to get the first payment until June in the new financial year, June or July, and there's whole cash flow issues for them. So, no, I mean, the government is going to have to they have to put resource into this if they want to achieve that outcome of more people being helped into employment. That doesn't come without resource consequences.
I mean, there definitely needs to be a resource, and I also think that bringing people in who've gone through a variety of these trainings will be important, because they will be able to talk about what those barriers were for themselves and what are those specific supports that made an absolute difference for them, and then which of these are actually scalable, and what are the local council, local authorities doing within their sort of jurisdiction and remit in order to try to support the different workability programs and things like that. But I think the real key is that employers need worked with, and there needs to be training on the job, a real job, and that when it says a pathway into work, I mean, like Kira's sister working minimum wage 4 hours a week cannot replace a benefit for her to survive. That is not enough, and so we can't see it as one or the other, but actually seeing that the ways in which the benefits actually allow people to have the ability to enter a workforce rather than cutting people off and stay in work rather than cutting it off at the knees, which I'm really afraid that even the ability to have some kind of stability is what you need in order to go to work is going to be cut off from people.
Okay, listen, thank you. We could easily talk for another hour on this,
Yeah.
absolutely. And committee are very concerned, I have to say, around the engagement piece. Committee have expressed that view very, very clearly, our concerns around the engagement and the need to have that anti-poverty strategy with resourcing, with targets, and that makes a real difference brought forward. So that's something. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
your
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and I'm going to email you the quotes from our lived experience advisory panel, and I want to thank them also for taking the time to express their feelings for yourselves today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
more, Liv. Okay, members, any actions arising out of that members briefly want to suggest, or will we... We'll obviously be coming back to it in significant fashion as time goes on. Kelly?
We've heard that the strategy will be out. Can we ask if there's an option for a copy of the strategy to come to ourselves in advance of it being made public? Obviously, it can be embargoed and it can be treated confidentially.
Yeah, members content, we seek that. Yeah. Thank you. And we have earlier asked, I think, that there would be no delay to the strategy. That was one of the things earlier, Claire. Yes, Kelly?
It's on a strategy. I was at an all-party group yesterday, and I was made aware that the Department for Communities are going back out and asking some of the disability sector to make comment on the disability, I think, employment strategy and the disability strategy. I think, can we get clarification? Is that actually one of the groups being consulted with that had been on the work streams? It's just to know what's that consultation on.
Yeah, we'll seek that, and we've sought further information around a number of strategies, and when we get that back, we will also maybe look at how we move forward on some of these. And it's important to reiterate, interlinked and interdependent strategies. They all need to come forward in a way which support each other. Okay, members, thanks for that. I'm going to take a quick comfort break here, maybe a 5 or 6 minute break just before the next session. So could I ask the clerk to bring us out of broadcasting?